Hey, it's Daddy Steve. Please like and subscribe. Please click on the Deck Heroes icon. Click on subscribe. It's 100% free. Blood in, blood out. And don't forget to click on the notifications just so you don't miss any amazing content. Okay, I've heard the first couple of minutes of this interview. This gentleman here that you can see in the background, he's interviewing somebody else, and the things that they touch on shape the society that we're in. And I think it's why society's going in the complete wrong direction. We will see. Well, let's go.
LBC Labour MP Belle Ribeiro Addy is with us, George Freeman from the Conservatives, Justine Greening, founder of the social mobility campaign The Purpose Coalition, and Matthew Torbett, political commentator and a campaigner on homelessness and prison reform. Right, here's a text question from Brian in Eastleigh. Why do young men have so few positive role models now? Now, the former England, it says here, men's football team, so I must say that, men's football team manager Sir Gareth Southgate has warned that young men are feeling isolated and are searching for direction online, ending up with them being manipulated by callous, manipulative and toxic influencers who willingly trick young men into believing that success is measured by money or dominance, never showing emotion, and that the world, including women, is against them. Justine Greening.
Hold on, just before she speaks, right? So why do men have so few positive role models and why are they looking online, right? That was the question. Now, do we think that she's going to talk about, well, it's maybe about men being excluded from the household. Maybe it's about the court system should a relationship broke down. Maybe it should be a push towards, again, 50-50 parenting. If we're talking about young men, so young men are going to be looking to other men for role models. No boy grows up wanting to be their mom. Surprise, surprise. You know what I mean? They may love their mom, but not one man, or very few, or the 1%, grow up wanting to be their mom. But they may want to be their dad. The dad will be the authority figure in the household, and that will guide where things go. We may go into things such as, what is the standards that people set right now in society in order to have kids in the first place? And maybe they're just not ready for it. Maybe it's the benefit system which is enabling people just to keep firing out kids and have no responsibility for it. Maybe it's just unfit fathers and unfit mothers. You know what I mean? So whoever's going to be taking that lead role, maybe they're just not quite fit for it. And there needs to be a little bit more kind of focused intervention in relevant areas with some actual thought about how you can push people to do things right. Maybe there needs to be some focus on where things start falling off that pathway to success. You know, are they attending school? What's their focus in school? And again, there needs to be something where you can positively usher parents to take responsibility for things. And if they're absolutely clueless, then again, why are we encouraging it with these systems which go there, which support it? And now let's see if that's what she's going to say, or whether they're going to say something completely different.
This might sound unfair, but where are the dads? You know, my dad was my ultimate role model. Obviously, I was his daughter, not a son, but, you know, he taught me so much of, I think, what helped me get on in life. You know, drive, hard work. He took me to sport, and I learned about teamwork. I think there's a genuine question about, in the end, it is about parenting, isn't it? A big part of the question on this. But I also recognise that in an online world, if you like, the ability to get exposed to some completely different role models who are quite beguiling has never been greater. I think if there's one thing that struck me this morning listening to the debate and hearing the reporting about Gareth Southgate, who I think has to be an amazing role model, is we've got to understand that we've come full circle.
Okay, I don't want to get those points lost. So she did say about the dad, and says they're doing that drive and hard work, and it has to come back to parenting. Absolutely everything that I said. I mean, she didn't go into the detail. She kind of threw it out there, and I say it's easy to overlook it, and that's why it gets overlooked. She's absolutely right, and that's where the focus should be, not bloody Gareth Southgate. The Gareth Southgate thing started the discussion. Fair enough. Now let's focus on solutions. Absolutely, and then we go into why is it an online world? Again, it goes back to the dads, giving them the drive and the hard work and the focus, and I guess a bit more discipline. I mean, an objective thought about the pathway to go into the future. That is the solution. So let's hope that's the focus.
So I've spent time focused on gender and sexism and equality for women, particularly in the workplace. We've focused on ethnicity, quite rightly. We've focused on sexuality. Now we're finally focusing on boys and men. And I think there's a common thread probably that connects all of this, which is around people who are coming from, if I can call it this, working class families. And in a sense, that start and if you like, the advantages of some of it. I like to think my journey was part of what built me, but also
She said working class families. Really, what she means is going back to the role of the dad. Now, if the dad's absent, what we're talking about? We're talking about single parent families. That's what we're talking about. And again, listen, let's not play let's not play blind. Right, let's not play blind. Having two parents won't be the solution to everything, but statistically, it's going to be better. It's better to having two people pushing in the right direction more so than one. So how can you bring about that change? Okay, this is what the debate really should be about, or the solution that should be, I say, front of mind in my point of view. And there's going to be other things as well. And there's some, I don't want to get drawn into the exceptions.
it's got some disadvantages, and I think sometimes that can be around the network you've got around you and the fact that you haven't got quite so much of a network to draw on. So, for example, I've never had a mentor, even now. And certainly when I was growing up, I remember asking my mum and dad where I should go to university, and I remember my mum's in the kitchen saying, "Oh, I don't know." You know, I think there's something around that wider support network that people need, that maybe some people have as part of their bigger family and they're having conversations at dinner table, but for most people, I'm going to say, actually, they're probably not. And so we do need to think about where they're getting that advice about options, careers. You know, for me as a local MP, you know, I had a lot of, like Bell, a lot of estates in my, you know, council, social housing, you know, and part of the challenge is what are the career ladders some people are seeing on those estates where you can be really successful, and that is basically, frankly, at times selling drugs. And, you know, we were in a prison the other day talking to some of the inmates in my team, and these were people who were convicted of drug dealing. They wanted to come out, but actually they were entrepreneurs. They didn't want to go and stack shelves in Co-op when they got out and had done their time.
Drug dealers, but they were actually entrepreneurs and didn't want to stack. Listen, again, it's that I can't stand this. Honestly, I can't stand it. Let's rewind that back again. Where's this kind of career pathway of success? Where's the ambition to be affluent and put the hard work in, all the foundations again? Okay, so if you don't focus on what it takes to get there, if you're kind of oblivious to it, or, you know, it's down to your dad. It wasn't all down to her dad. It was down to her as well. So how did she get there? You know what I mean? So it's not just throwing these words out there, career pathways and role models and da-da-da. Okay, how are these kids going to get it? But if they're not going to get it from the coincidence of chance, how can we make that more likely? And let's just stop making excuses for people who put no effort into anything and end up being drug dealers. You're making excuses for criminals to be criminals, and that kind of normalizes it. Now, these are the scum of the earth, okay? And they haven't put the effort into it. They're lightweight on effort. You know what I mean? So their outcomes should be prison. And that's it, and it's a scourge of society. That's where the focus should be, not making these stupid excuses. And these kids, they should be actively encouraged into work. That should be more or less their only option. Otherwise, what they're going to be layabouts from youth to the rest of their life in and out of prison selling drugs. Is that the solution? There's no solution. You're just kind of describing outcomes. It's bullshit. But the worst thing is, I say, not only describing, excusing these negative outcomes. Let's get to fixing it. So what should be fixing it? What should be fixing it is having a closer eye what's going on in the schools again, about attendance, about application, are the problems at home, and just being able to come up with ideas about how you can force parents just to be more proactive on it. Maybe you need to take away their benefits. Maybe you need to force them into some kind of parenting classes again, or their benefits get kind of hampered because they're not going to feel it any other way. And if they're at work, then, you know, maybe then you need to get some, you can take some direct payments, hit their paychecks if they happen to be in work, you know, you never know. And if it is having an impact on their household, then basically they'll feel it, and maybe they'll be more incentivized to do something about it. And once that word gets out, maybe you won't get a cycle of similar people thinking it's easy just to have kids. Anyway, let's go.
They wanted to be able to put that drive to be successful into a legitimate business. And so I think it just tells you that we've got to be building pathways forward for people. If we're not doing that, then they're going to look to other people for advice on what a sensible pathway forward is.
Well, this is definitely another situation in which we have previously seen huge amounts of cuts in terms of youth services, in terms of provisions, in terms of all the different things that used to have coming up when you were younger that could support you. And I take your point about parenting, but I do see...
What does she mean about you? She's not talking about youth clubs, is she? Hopefully, listen, in my life, I'm born in the UK, I'm in my 40s. I've never seen a youth club in my life. It's going to be some kind of playhouse. Also, I don't know what it is, to be fair, but is it some kind of academic centre? Some kind of after-school club where they can kind of focus on their studies where they're lacking so they can build the solid foundations in order to be affluent, or if they're not academically driven, where they can learn tools of the trade and it's made interesting and engaging. Is that what it was? Or was it somewhere where kids just kick about? And we're talking about a different age. Completely pointless. Give a bit of detail about how it actually helps instead of throwing out these pointless keywords.
Moment, how much influence online has for young people, things that are online. And we generally as a society, as much as we think that we do things in terms of equality and inclusion, I think we haven't focused enough on tackling misogyny. We really, really haven't. It's still such a huge problem, because if we had done more, I don't think you would see what...
Hold on. So I just watched that TV series, absolutely amazing, called Adolescence with Stephen Graham. What the hell's misogyny got to do with this thing? What, because we're talking about Tate? Are we talking about Tate? Are we talking about, if you look in the bottom right hand corner, men lacking role models? But it's not about Tate. Tate is a fraction of the conversation. The second we're talking about Tate, we're not talking about men anymore, we're talking about women. Because we're talking about misogyny. Is this about the men and their problems, or are we somehow reflecting it back to self, which is about women and misogyny? But anyway,
a huge problem, because if we had done more, I don't think you would see what we're seeing, the Andrew Tates of this world, and people actually, and young men actually moving towards that. It's because we've left gaps open for people to slip back into that mindset. That it's okay.
Part of the issue there was I was listening to something this morning, and somebody was talking about the proportion of male teachers in secondary schools. Now, in primary schools, it's always been the case that it's been predominantly a female profession. But in secondary schools, it's now become the same. There are some secondary schools in the country where there are no male teachers at all. And therefore, if you're a 13, 14-year-old boy, you're easy prey for the likes of Andrew Tate, in a sense, because you see, and I've heard this personally from one or two people in their 20s who wanted to know my view on Andrew Tate. And I remember one of them, I'd never actually heard of him, and then I sort of did my research. And I could see how he had this appeal for certain groups of people, and it's very difficult to counter.
Yeah, and incel culture, that type...
He just said, okay, so there's some schools where there's no male teachers, and because there's female teachers, that's a breeding culture for the Andrew Tate kind of philosophy on women. How does that even link? There's 3 boats in the ocean. That's it. There's 3 boats in the ocean and they're not necessarily linked. Oh my gosh. No, lady, don't agree with him. That's clueless as the rest of them.
When it gets to its most extreme, can lead to some awful violence. And the thing is, we're not checking it enough. We're not checking it enough. We're not creating situations where people aren't falling, or young men are not falling into that trap. I take your point about male teachers, but it's not even just about male role models. It's what we do as a society, what we promote as a society, what we see as wrong. There's so many things when it comes to misogyny that we are too often told to just brush off our shoulder. That's just it. It's just lads. It's just that, it's really, really awful that we still let these things happen and let these things be said.
George?
No, I agree with Belle and Justine. I'd add in a few things. I think sport, actually, if you look back in our history in the last 150 years, sport has been a really important part of giving particularly young men a chance to role models. And we've really, competitive sport has been hammered in our state education system, and the austerity and coalition cuts didn't help either, and it's been going on for years. The worklessness conversation, we've got places where there just aren't men who have worked and gone out and provided that working role model. So there's a whole bunch.
Hold on. Sport providing a role model. What do you mean about how to kick a ball? We're in the UK here. We're talking about sport being a role model. Sport can motivate you to want to do that sport. Yeah, it can. Yeah, fair enough. And if that footballer talks on something, if you bother to even listen to what they say, and I accept that in the online culture you get more chances to hear them talking in some kind of sterile interview on something kind of branded, probably from an advertiser. Brother, I think you're taking that way too far, in my point of view.
Stuff there, but I also think it's quite deep economics. We've created a service economy, and not just in our deindustrialised communities, but across the country. I think there are a lot of men who feel rather marginalised, and that's to do with what we teach them and all of that. But there is a cultural...
Or do you mean emasculated?
Emasculated is a better word, yeah. But I think there's something else, which is the alt-right, the Andrew Tates.
Just a second, he's talking about, I think what he's talking about is we've got into a service economy, so there's less kind of manual manufacturing jobs, and that being somehow emasculating. It's just, how is all this kind of linking to anything? It's not linking to anything, and if you give it a little bit of consideration, the kids of today don't want to work necessarily. I'm not talking about everybody, but I think the main problem is they're not driven to feel that they have to work. You know what I mean? That's the problem. It could be manufacturing, it could be service, it could be anything. They're not putting the effort in to get the outcomes. So listen, we're either going to talk about what the real problems are and come with some solutions. So about effectively how are we enabling that to go on, which is going to come back to benefits and things like that, and kind of actively encouraging them down the line in order to retrain, basically, and just coming up with those type of ideas. And if you're not going to have any ideas, then why are they on the show?
Use social media not just to sort of tackle these grievances, but to fuel them. And I've been watching adolescents, as I'm sure many of your listeners have. Matthew Said had a brilliant piece in the Sunday Times last week on this. Actually, Belle, echoing much of what you said, that there's a modern misogyny which the Tates of this world are fueling, pouring, fuel on the flames. So I think there's a few things going on. There's some breakdown of our structures and our society, some economic marginalisation, and then people who should be helping to tackle it, fueling it. And I hope maybe we've got to a nadir, and this will be a national conversation and we'll turn the corner.
Matthew, I know you've done a lot of work in this area.
Hold on, he talked about misogyny and the Tate's fueling it, taking again to this misogyny debate. It's meant to be about good role models, not like the outcomes of bad role models. And he said, then people who should be tackling it, fueling it. So we're talking about some online random person who's financially incentivized in order to be alarmist and be an idiot. And somehow we kind of indulge ourselves with listening to that kind of tripe. Is he the person who's meant to be changing it? Or have you put absolutely no suggestions forwards about any solutions to any of these problems, same as everybody else? Just keywords without any kind of practicality. Well, actually, yeah, the most important thing we could do, as I say, is to incentivize people to stay in school and disincentivize things, and the checks and balances and penalties, basically, if people don't kind of at least do the bare minimum, that type of thing.
Right.
Yeah, it scares me a lot, Ian, I must admit. Like George, I watched Adolescence this week, and I think I'd actually been a little bit naive. I look at Andrew Tate and stuff like that, and you sort of go, people grow out of this sort of stuff, they'll move on. Because I did. I won't ruin the series for people that want to go and watch Adolescence, but I kept crying because I thought that kid was me at school. Not the hatred of women, but the questioning of everything. Why don't people like me? I'm ugly. Why am I like this? I think the one thing that saved me that Gareth Southgate touched on was football and role models there. Yeah. Not that my dad wasn't there. Me and my dad have never had a sort of deep conversation or anything like that. He's quite a shy bloke. But role models, as Justine touched on around dads, the Centre for Social Justice did a report which Gareth Southgate cited, in which 2.5 million boys are without dads, absent dads, and that can be dads that are dead as well. These aren't just people that always run away. But that was me. And conspiracy theories are very enticing in a very scary world. So I remember, and I've never spoken about this actually because you worry about potential political futures and stuff. I remember questioning the world a lot and not knowing where my place was, and I'd stopped playing football at an half decent level anyway, and I flirted with the far right a lot. I remember Tommy Robinson and people like that coming through, and they gave me an excuse and a scapegoat essentially as to why my life wasn't how I wanted it to be. And what Andrew Tate does very successfully, very articulate, is he puts women as the scapegoat, and all of a sudden this very confusing world that you watch the news and they're talking about inflation and GDP and the Middle East is in chaos, we might be going to war, is there going to be conscription, all these manner of things. There's no jobs, we're a 90% service-based economy, where's the industry's gone, what do I do, is my PIP going to go, all these sort of things that are worrying you. Well, it's all right because it's all the women. Feminism's gone too far, they want to drag you down, they hate men, they all want men dead and all this sort of stuff, and he's very good at doing it. And what worries me is there's a vacuum of leadership in this country, and I don't just mean political issues. For me, Gareth Southgate's the epitome. He is calm, he never threw his team under the bus, he took everything on himself and said, no, the buck stops with me. He was considerate, he would take his time and think of others, he would listen, and he's exactly the sort of role model we need. I worry that we don't have that for teenagers at the moment. I remember Gareth Southgate as a player. I think Roy Keane is a good one, as a bit of an hard man type as well. And I couldn't sleep after watching Adolescence, I can't lie, because I thought, I've been naive as to thinking this problem's going to go away, and it's not actually. And I think we've all actually got a bit of a duty to...
Do you know what I think the skill of Andrew Tate is? I hate even using that word in relation to him. But he gets away with all the misogyny stuff because there are things that he says which actually aren't mad and evil and extreme right wing, and they are actually relevant to some of these boys' lives. Exactly. And so they listen to that, they think, well, that sounds sensible. So they then listen to all the horrible stuff and come to the conclusion that sounds sensible. Exactly. And I don't know how you counter that.
It's like poison in a parcel, isn't it? And the parcel, you go, oh yeah, he's got my grievance, he understands and then the poison is...
Well, you begin to believe the far-fetched stuff. I remember seeing a very early clip of Andrew Tate, and it was very anti-establishment. He said, they want us all to give up meat.
That is exactly what he said. The poison in the parcel. Let's try to remember that one. Well, there's that little nugget of something that you actually agree with, but this is Trump as well, obviously. But there's that nugget of what you believe, which is truth in the middle, but it's surrounded by these other things. And I think people just get drawn into everything. You know what I mean? And it's quite worrying. If people could actually focus on, there's that bit there, which I value quite a lot and I actually agree with, but there's that, which is complete bullshit, and I'd rather separate myself from that, because you can't really have one without the other. You can't say you're pro him and ignore all of these other things which are completely awful. That's the problem, really. And without that, there's no real pressure for him to change, because it's almost like a blanket acceptance of what he's saying, in terms of all these horrible things as well, which you could never associate with self. But I think that people are in that kind of complete buy-in phase right now, 100% buy-in, because you agree with the nuggets of something at the core that you agree with. You know, I mean, you just buy in 100%, and dangerous.
They'll eat what they want. They want us to stop flying, but they drive around in Range Rovers and get private jets. And you sort of go, yeah, most people will go, yeah, there's a hypocrisy at the top of. And then he goes off the cliff and he went, well, you know why they want us to have electric cars? Because they want us, they want to control our cars and da. And so at that point, he loses a lot of people. But because there's a kernel of truth of what's said, you go, no, this is exactly why.
But that's just it. We need to tackle those particular issues. If people weren't feeling so isolated, if people weren't feeling like these young men weren't feeling like they had no place, like somebody was taking their job, even though that's not necessarily the case. If they didn't feel all of these things because society was dealing with these problems, they wouldn't find a home with the Andrew Tates of this world.
I think that's such an important point, and it comes down to people having.
I was just trying to think, say if you flip this debate, it was about, young girls having role models, and there's a guy talking about that female lived experience. You may well think, well, how the hell would he know? And what he should really be doing is listening and following up on the point of actually have that lived experience, because it's almost ridiculous to think that a man could understand what it's like to be a little girl. And I actually think, having listened to this debate, even though there are elements of, common sense things coming through, and obviously they would have heard other debates, and it doesn't necessarily mean they don't have a reasoned opinion, but there's a lot of things here, which again, as soon as we get drawn in that misogyny kind of direction, where the thing is, well, let's focus on how do we get them those good role models, and then we get drawn into a different debate on a tangent. That's the problem, because you don't have the lived experience. You should be listening, to understand. People who've had that lived experience and gone through it and understand the male mindset. Otherwise, you'll just be lost, and we'll just be talking in tangents.
A hope for a better life and some aspiration, and understanding what the pathway is forward for them. And, I mean, especially in London, I represented, you represent really diverse constituencies, and it is literally like opportunity is hiding in plain sight. You've got people who are walking past houses and they have no idea how the person who owns that house was in a position to own it. And so if you're seeing that every day, you literally don't know, it doesn't matter how hard you work, you can never get into that property. That's why people feel disenfranchised.
These bullshit excuses. We all know the pathway to achievement. We all know it. There's an established pathway of achievement. Where you go through the academic, or you go through a trade, or you save money, or you work hard, you do extra shifts, and you think, okay, I've got an idea here in order to make business working for myself. Something legit, not the suggestion that she was saying earlier, some kind of illegal, I think she said drug dealing or something like that. Anyway, again, so you save money, you have an idea, you do some research, you test it in the market, and you just put all your effort into it, and you're the master of all trades, you're the master of marketing, you're a master of sales. You might have to, I don't know, depends what you're selling, you know what I mean? Maybe you go out there and research online and think, oh, I got a product here, and I've actually put some effort into it and listen to others and make a success of it. Business, tradesman, academic, professional, or just be happy with an everyday job, doing something else in the service industry. That's it. And you live within the means of your efforts in order to make yourself successful. So if you haven't put in those foundations, you haven't got that effort to get there, then you will never get there. You're unlikely to get there unless you can kick a ball really hard into a net. You know what I mean? And somebody's willing to invest in you. And there's a lot of people who have those dreams and they don't make it. So what's their backup plan? This is how we get to successful, to the house that she's talking about. It's not in dreams. And I don't think that's discouraging. But to entertain it is damaging, because you're not putting people on the path that, listen, this is where your focus needs to be. Same way it's a focus for everybody else, unless you're happy, you're lucky enough to inherit the money. But even if you did inherit the money, if you haven't got the mindset of success, you're going to waste it anyway. Probably, right or wrong.
And I think I was the last generation where I could come from where I came from, be the first person in my family to go to university, work really hard, get a good job, and then I could buy my first place, and I was on the housing ladder. Right now, the property I would be, maybe, probably not, but the max property I'd be buying would be nothing compared to that.
Trust
and
me.
I feel extremely, it's that decoupling of effort and reward.
Yes.
That is why people are casting around.
Again, it's about how much of your efforts until that point allowed you to enjoy in terms of the fruits of the society that you live in. You know what I mean? So if you haven't got quite enough money to live in Mayfair, which is a very expensive part of London, you live within your means. Yeah, that's your incentive and your drive to earn more, and then maybe one day you can do it. And if you were bothered enough and motivated enough, you know, maybe you can. We're in London. I think she said she's in London. We're in the UK. I think it's the 6th richest country in the world. It most definitely is possible. And that's why some people, when they come to this country, they can't believe that people are in this malaise. And then they just crack on and, you know, they can be successful. The same thing that we could have done. Every single one of us, if we really tried, was just making these excuses and these red herrings, this entitlement mentality that something should be given to us somehow as a right. Now you get it from hard efforts, or the chance of fortune that your parents grant it to you. You just live within your means and hard effort. There you go.
Thought, but
Why they're there.
I also think all men, I mean, everyone's got a job to bring up boys, but I think men have got a particular duty. I'm very lucky. My son and daughter have left home and they've got
You're
through.
lucky they've left.
I know what I meant. Sorry, I'm lucky. Well, yeah.
They probably think the same.
But they've come through this whole difficult time and they're well-adjusted young adults. But I think men have got a job as well to help make clear to boys there are lines, and you've got to behave well.
Please like, subscribe. That's Steve, and I'm out.